4th time in a row. I'm on a roll compared to what I used to do, which is like 1 video a year. And they're all streams because I don't have time to edit them down. I'm hopefully going to build a PC soon because I'd like to start streaming on there. Because I'd prefer to play games on the PC because I love my PS, but I'm trying to transition over. But for now, streaming's just easy for me. Hell, I might just keep doing this. It's not like I'm doing any fancy editing anyway. It's just me talking. So, let me, one moment, I must double check something. Every stream, I'm going to double check to make sure my audio's going. I don't want to repeat the first one, because I felt like I was on a roll, and none of it recorded. What? Why is it so much? It shouldn't be nearly this loud in-game. I might have to do something about that if the time arises. But, well, hello, welcome back. Last stream, I discussed... Oh, one moment. Alright. I apologize if my microphone just died. Okay, you know what? I'm going to turn the game down. Turn down to half volume. I really need to hear anything right now. But keeping in line with last stream, I discussed the history of Genghis Khan, and for anything I talk about, I apologize for any inaccuracies. This is literally just me talking off the top of my head. Some things I can remember pretty well. Sometimes I mix up the facts because sometimes I can remember bits and pieces, and sometimes I can remember the whole thing. But when I start trying to put like thought to word, it doesn't happen because I have a very hard time focusing. My brain works great on the inside, but on the outside, not so much. But I decided that last night I mentioned a story of a Japanese man, and as I said in the stream before, I'm probably not going to do names and stuff because I just don't, for the life of me, remember them. But I want to talk about my favorite Japanese myth that I heard of, and apparently he was an actual guy, but obviously it's considered myth because parts of the story were heavily embellished, as you'll most likely find out, and if not, literally the most legendary man in history. But it's a story of this Japanese man who was a samurai, but he wasn't. A lot of the samurai were nobility and stuff, because throughout a lot of history, throughout most societies during a lot of time in history, it's been kind of the upper crust, like the military is formed of upper class citizens, because a lot of places you had to like get your own armor and your own equipment and maintain your own gear, and peasants couldn't afford that. Well, the trained troops were upper crust. The foot soldiers obviously were like peasants and stuff. Yo, high five. But no, never mind, not a high five. But with the samurai, it was a case of the nobility were more often than not trained in the school of being a samurai. And this guy had, I don't know how, I think he just, I didn't hear much tell of his like proper background before his whole being a samurai, like none of his childhood or anything. There's probably a lot more to it. And the guy who I'm setting up the characters as best I can, and then I'll get into the story proper, but I don't want to keep cutting off the story to mention little details, because he meets up with another samurai who I think is actually already established, but I'll tell how he plays into the myth. But basically there's this samurai who, back in his day, I believe he was 6 or 7 feet tall. He was of a height that he was considered massive to people of the time, because humans in general, I believe, were a lot shorter back then, especially Japanese, because already Asian people are known to be of a smaller stature. So he was a fucking titan. And he was samurai not so much in that, because samurai training is very meticulous, and it's very skill-based. And his was more so, he had, I don't know if they call it a washing pole. That's what I've heard it called. It's like an extremely long version of a katana, like a very long blade, almost like a bastard sword, but a katana blade. And, apologies about that, what he would do, I'm sorry, I'll get into the story, I just want to make sure, every time I lean over, my microphone has a chance of disconnecting because it's that bad. I just have been not wanting to go out into this whole shit show to go buy a mic or send one to my house. But, so he wouldn't fight so much in the traditional way of the samurai of, like, skill and, like, keeping distance between your opponent. A battle of, almost as much a battle of wit as it is a battle of strength. And what he would do is he was just so fucking big that he would just challenge everybody he came across to a fight and just brute force cut them down like butter because they just couldn't overpower him. He was just too big to stop. And it went on like this for a long time. Apparently he racked up a pretty high count of people who he took down through just sheer crush, smash, kill. And he kept on like this for quite a long time, like throughout a good chunk of his career, until he came across a samurai who's apparently an actual master. And this was the first time in his life that he challenged him to a fight, obviously, because he's like, stupid baby man, I'm the best samurai there is. And in which case, he got his ass readily handed to him by someone who was actually trained in combat. And rather than, I don't know if they had a system of you had to kill who you fought or you stopped when they were knocked down, because I know for a very long time they were very much so heavy on an honor system of, like, it's better to die an honorable death, which will come into play in the story, actually. It's better to die an honorable death than to live a coward. But either way, he lost this fight hard. And he talked to the samurai. He's like, don't kill me. Please take me on as your student. I am extremely impressed. Let me just be with you and just learn from you. And so he did. And they went on their way for quite a while together, apparently. They went on adventures, all that fun stuff. And apparently, the man who he was with got involved with a woman who was the daughter of, I believe, a shogun, a very powerful shogun who very much so did not like him. And as things tend to happen in ancient history, he said, kill that bitch. He's trying to get with my daughter, I don't like that. So they sent out an army to kill this guy. And this guy, they find a little island with a kind of settlement, a little building in the middle of it. So basically it's not like isolated in the middle of an ocean, but it's isolated to the point where the only foot access is through one bridge at the front. And the shogun chases them down, and he basically corners them at this island, and he's hell-bent on killing this guy, and he doesn't want to die a dishonorable death. So what he does is he goes and climbs up into the tower, and he asks this giant, he says, hey, would you... Well, I don't even know if he had to ask, but he was like, I need you to watch over me while I go and commit seppuku. I believe it's seppuku. It's Japanese would have, like I said, honorable death rather than a dishonorable life. And seppuku was a traditional way of suicide, ritual suicide, so that you died an honorable death. And so he wanted to have this huge guy. He said, hey, could you stall for me? Basically said, could you stall for me while I go and commit seppuku? And obviously this man would get his honorable death because he died defending his master. So he said, alright, yeah, obviously. Ride or die for you. Literally, I owe you my life. So he goes, and this man goes up to the tower to commit ritual suicide. And this bridge isn't very wide. It can fit, I'd say, 2 or 3 people side through side. So this shogun shows up, and this giant of a man just stands out on the bridge. He's just sitting there, not moving. Battle stance at the ready. And the shogun, I think, had a couple hundred to maybe over 1,000 people with him. He had a huge contingency. And he told them, well, he's obviously up in that tower, the man he was after. I want you to go, get through the brute, and then kill him. And they try to get across the bridge. I want you to picture this. There is a man nearly twice their size, double their weight, easily twice as strong, with a blade twice the length of theirs, who has now actually been trained in combat on a bridge that's just wide enough that his blade can cover the whole thing. And as you can imagine, no one could cross. Anyone who tried to come even close to crossing was cut the fuck down, just for hours on end, just trying desperately to get across this bridge as the bodies just kept piling, because no one could touch this absolute demon. I think someone worded as he fought in Japanese, their Oni is like a type of spirit or a demon. They said he fought as like Oni Unchained or something like that, just an absolute fucking monster that no one could touch. And the shogun is like, oh my god, what the hell? This man is... People actually started to become afraid of him. Like, they thought he was an Oni. They were like, he is not human. And his men started to get panicky, and he's like, alright, this isn't going to work. At this rate, my men are actually going to turn tail and run from one guy. So what he orders them to do, he says, alright, I want you to stand back, and in my opinion, probably should have done this way earlier on, he says, I want you to fire a volley. Blot out the sun, like the Spartans just blot out the sun with arrows. And they did. They fired hundreds and hundreds of arrows and peppered the bridge all over this guy. And I believe at the time that they had done this, it was foggy as well. Or fog had started to roll in as they were doing this. So they peppered him with arrows, and a fog had set in, so they couldn't see him. They didn't know, they had assumed he was dead. But in the fog, after this rain of arrows, they saw him still standing there. And at this point, many of them did think, oh my god, he's actually a demon. And the Shogun managed to keep them from running, but he said, alright, just stay. And he said, once the smoke clears, we'll make sure that he's dead. And once the fog banks rolled away, they went over and inspected, and he had died. But here's the thing. He, in his afterlife, in the sheer devotion to his master and refusal to die like a bitch, he, while being filled with hundreds of thousands of arrows, did not flinch. So much so that his inability to just give a fuck, and so much so the volume of arrows, that they pinned his body into an upright position, because the battle stance that the samurai have is very much about, being balanced, completely balanced, so no one can throw you off your guard unless you switch stances. So it perfectly pinned him into place, and he died in a battle stance. And for another few hours while the fog was there, they were terrified of a corpse that just stood there, unflinching badass, as he died in the most epic way possible. And obviously, his master had more than enough time to actually, kill himself and commit the ritual, because obviously they were too fucking terrified. And by the time they went across, I think the Shogun actually gave him an honorable burial. I think he probably tossed the corpse aside of the guy who committed ritual suicide, because he hated them. But this big guy, he was like, oh my god, you were an actual legend. You died hella honorable, more so than anyone I can imagine. Just please, we will give him an honorable burial, because for fuck's sake, the man deserves it. So they actually went and gave him a proper burial, as he so rightfully deserved. And I believe that is a legend that has persisted for quite some time, which I think is kind of amazing. I apologize, give me one moment. My microphone's probably going to cut out here. I've got to double check something. I'm trying to run. I mentioned getting a new job last night, and they've got a little training program that I've got to sit through, but I'm just having it run in the background because it's very basic stuff. It's Microsoft and Teams, here is how you join a call, or here is how you log into Teams. So it's not something I particularly... Nobody has actually done it. Everybody's cheated. Okay, let me get one moment in. Alright. Double check my microphone. Hopefully it's settled. PlayStation says it has, so I'm gonna pray that that is correct. But, yeah. So he obviously got given an honorable burial, which was insane. And, I think... I want to keep going a little bit longer. With the things I know about history, I know a lot of facts, but not the whole... I've studied the whole story, but it gets to where stories start blurring together, except for the extremely exceptional ones, like the Spartans. Oh my god. I'm going to talk about a few... I'm going to talk about a few events that I really liked and thought about, because my thought process is, if I talk about something that seems cool, I at the very least may not tell you everything you want to know, but I can spark your interest in a thing you may have never heard about in your life, so you can go out and research it on your own. After the Spartans, I'm going to mention the Attack of the Dead Men, which, holy fucking shit, my favorite event in history. But, so the Spartans, I want to just talk about a few things I learned about Sparta. Such as the fact that, apparently, I don't know how much this, also, again, all of this, I am not, obviously, a factual genius. The few things I know are fairly factual, like the Genghis Khan thing, and some of the stuff I'm mentioning with Sparta, apparently they say that they did not per se kill children deemed unworthy, or they might have killed disabled children, but it was more that apparently one thing they would do when the kids were babies, and I found this was hilarious, is they'd take a cask of wine and they'd dunk the baby into it upside down so the baby would drink some of it, and they'd test the baby's alcohol tolerance to see how much of a baby man he'd be. But something we do know the Spartans did, which is fucking legendary, is they actually practiced, for lack of a better word, the art of shit-talking. I don't remember what it precisely was called, but Spartan children were actually trained to do comebacks. And I think one of my favorite ones was, there was a Spartan general meeting with the king of this town or city or whatever, and the king was walking around his walls, and he was gesturing to them like, "Behold the walls of my city, how mighty and strong are the walls of Sparta this great. Behold our art, is Sparta this fine," and just going on and on about, "Oh, is Sparta this cool? Our dicks are bigger than yours." And the Spartan, after he was going on, the guy was, the main response was to the, "Are the walls of Sparta this good?" And the man takes the tip of his spear and basically gestures to the wall of angry men that had been accompanying him, and he says, "These are the walls of Sparta." And it's like, wow. He's got a fair fucking point. And I think there's another one. There's, because in Sparta, an interesting thing was women were given a lot more freedom. Like, women and elderly were treated a lot better than everywhere else in the world. I'm going to tell a couple segmented stories to kind of try and prove this. One of my favorite ones is they were holding, I believe it was the Olympics. It was some big event, and there was an old man apparently going through the different stands, because there were the different cities and states would sit in their own kind of sections, almost like teams. And this little man was going through trying to go to all these places, and all these people from all these different cities are like, "Oh, stupid old man, fuck off, we're not going to help you. You're just some wrinkled up old bastard. No one's going to help you." And they see him going to the Spartans, and presumably they're like, "Oh, he's gonna get drop kicked by the Spartans." And immediately every Spartan there offers up their seat to this man with great reverence, because the Spartan way of thinking I very much so approve of. There are a few honorable ways you can die. Of old age, having been a soldier, meaning it's not that you were a coward, it seemed to be the thought process was, no Spartan could be a coward, so for you to have lived as long as you have means you have to have fought just as hard as everyone else, and as just as many wars and battles as everyone else. You're just such a fucking badass that you didn't get killed. And in their minds, that is very much so grounds for, if you are lived to be an old age, you have to have been some type of badass. And that was kind of their philosophy with women as well, but with childbirth. Because in a lot of other places of the world, for much of history, women were obviously treated like shit. And in Sparta, they still weren't treated nearly as good as they are today. They weren't allowed to sit in on council quite as much, but they were given a lot of freedoms, because the Spartan mindset was, women give birth. If there were no women, there would be no Spartans, there would be no Sparta. And another noble way you could die, it was like in combat of old age, having been a soldier, or dying in childbirth. They said, you have died performing the greatest service that could ever be done for Sparta, even over war. Because over all the wars to defend the land, over everything that's done, making Spartans is the thing that makes Sparta Sparta. You are the reason that this place exists, and you died trying to put more brave soldiers into this world. Godspeed to you, you're a fucking legend. And they were given honorable burials. It was considered an extremely honorable way to die, because you died performing the greatest act. And it's that tied into, I started going off on that because there's an event where a woman was, I believe, they were either walking through Sparta, or a Spartan woman was walking through a woman in Troy. And I believe a woman was walking through Sparta with another Spartan woman, and she's asking, why do Spartans have so much freedom? And I'm trying to remember the remark the woman had, because by God was it savage. I think she basically just mentioned how that Spartans know how much important women are. I butchering how absolutely fucking badass it was. But she just roasted the hell out of this woman, and that Spartans were, like I said, trained specifically in shit talking, which is absolutely amazing. And I'm trying to think of anything else I want to talk about Sparta, because I really want to talk about, this is going to be the last thing I talk about tonight, I think. But I really want to talk about the Attack of the Dead Men. So I'm just going to give a quick rundown of the Attack of the Dead Men. And real quick, I'm going to double check my mic to make sure it's still going. I'm half tempted to, now that I actually have money, I'm really tempted to get something off Amazon. But I'm going to talk about the Attack of the Dead Men for a bit, or the basic gist of it. I'd highly advise you look into it. I'm going to try not to embellish it. Well, I'm going to embellish it a bit, because fuck, I think it's cool. But I'm going to try and state the facts as I know them. So, and I'm going to give a rough guesstimation of the location where it is. I don't remember exactly where it was, but I know this was during World War I, and for those of you, you've probably heard of it, but during World War I, they started using gas as a weapon, and this was obviously before the Geneva Convention, because World War I was where we brought out fun stuff like flamethrowers and poison gas, and we started realizing, wow, guns may be bad, but this shit is just straight up inhumane. There's got to be rules for this. But they were allowed to use gas back then because the Geneva Convention had been set up. Oh, excuse me one moment, my stomach is... pardon me. But the rules hadn't been established yet, so they had free reign to use like mustard gas, which I believe started burning the inside of your lungs, and you start coughing up bits of lung and blood, and you die a horrible death. So there was a castle, I believe it was Prussia? I know that they were called the Auschwitz, or something like that, because there's a band called Sabaton, S-A-B-A-T-O-N, who do only songs about history, pretty much. And they've done two about the Attack of the Dead Men, actually. This next one is my favorite. And they mention the Auschwitz. It's something, I believe they're Russian, or very closely related to Russia. And basically the story is there was this castle, I believe it was a castle, and because the siege castles were less of a thing, obviously, during World War I, but they still existed, so they were used as strategic points as best as could be used. And if I'm correct, this is some of the first time that mustard gas was properly used. So a contingency of a few thousand Germans were marching on this fort. I think they held a few... I'm just going to call them Russians. I apologize if that's incorrect, but that's close to where they were, if I'm correct. I would highly advise you look it up. If you want to correct me, feel free, but I'm going to call them the Russians because it's the closest thing I can approximate them to, because I don't want to keep butchering the name over and over again. So these Russians are inside this castle. There's a couple hundred of them holed up. And the Germans go to take the castle, and what they do, which, since gas was a thing, they didn't have to actually fight, they just, for I believe it was nearly a full day or multiple, just started mustard gassing the hell out of this fort and just slowly waiting for everyone on the inside to die. And for those of you who don't know, a way that people try and prevent gas attacks is, I believe, you take cloth and you urinate in it. And it helps, not a lot, but it somewhat helps filter out the gas when you don't have a gas mask, which many people back then did not, because obviously they didn't think they'd need them. The British took a long time to get an actual functioning one out. So they didn't have gas masks, and they were basically just wrapping these soaked rags around their faces, dying horrible deaths. And a lot of them come very close to death. Oh, I just got invited to a party. Excuse me one moment. Probably not going to join it, but a lot of people... I apologize, give me... These Russians were inside being gassed day and night, and it was fucking horrible. So what these Germans did was after they had assumed these men were dead, because obviously they totally should be, and this is another reason I'm calling them the Russians, because this just feels like a Russian thing that would happen. So they go in, and these Germans start moving to walk into the castle, check out the corpses, see if there's any supplies. And a funny thing happens. Not everyone's dead. And the thing that particularly scared the fuck out of the Germans is, as I mentioned with mustard gas, you start coughing up bits of lung. I believe your eyes start bleeding, so you look like a zombie. Now imagine after day and night assuming they went way overkill trying to make extra sure that these people were dead. It was considered physically impossible to survive the conditions that they did. So the Germans walk in, only to be met with these men screaming out, blood pouring from their mouths and eyes. They looked like the actual undead. And the Germans, honestly, in my opinion, rightfully so, based off of what they knew, lost their shit and thought the dead had actually risen, and just all these Germans led a full-on retreat because they, in their minds, thought it was physically impossible for anyone to survive that, so they had to be undead. And I assume their vocal cords had been fucked up in ways as well, so you can imagine the blood-curdling screams. And because it's Russians, they were just filled, well, like I said, they were close, I believe they were close, but they were filled with this blood-curdling, just through sheer hatred of the enemy alone they lived on, and just came barreling out of this castle. And the Germans went a full retreat. They were like, oh my god, they have fucking zombies, oh my god. And obviously, nobody survived. They died, I believe, shortly after the Germans were gone. But you bet your ass, the Germans hightailed it long and far and gave them plenty of time to deal with whatever they needed to. I think the fort was probably still lost, but these men, in their last moments of life, through just sheer refusal to die, convinced a contingency of Germans into believing they were the undead. They didn't plan on that. They just were so hardcore. They said, we're going to die anyways. We will stab them to death with bayonets if we have to. Which the Germans just shit themselves and ran. Which I absolutely adore. But I apologize for having to cut this stream short. I might stream again tomorrow. I like streaming, but I have to find things to talk about. That, and my school is starting up again. I'm going to a tech college. So I'll probably only stream on Saturdays and Sundays. Which this is not like, I'm mostly recording these to have them put on my channel, not to have people watch them live, so that's okay. But the videos will probably only be coming up on Saturday and Sunday, well, possibly Sunday and Monday, because it takes a while for YouTube to actually have these appear on my channel. But I hope you all have a good day, morning, noon, night, breakfast, brunch, whatever the hell it may be, wherever the hell you are. I hope you have a good time. I hope you stay safe during these trying times, and best of luck to you. I hopefully will see you this weekend. Well, goodbye.